In room, a boy sees the space he lives in and his mom is his whole world. Not until she reveals a truth that sounds almost unreal to him. His mother battles to escape her captor by putting him up in a risky plan. The movie begins with an introduction to Jack. He's the narrator of this story. His knowledge of his birth was that he fell from heaven into his ma's belly through the skylight in room. Jack wakes Ma to tell her it was his 5th birthday. She cuddles him with so much love, and he's excited over his new age. His ma, Joy Newsom, is not the very happy woman Jack pictures her to be. Old Nick had tricked her when she was 17 to help with his sick dog. He held her captive for 7 years to satisfy his desires, and she had Jack in the process. Ma adores Jack despite the circumstances surrounding his birth. Jack carefully greets everything in the room, from the lamp to the TV. They sit for breakfast after taking his last vitamin tablet. Ma cringes in pain from a bad tooth. However, she reminds herself that pain was only in the mind. Joy must have probably been pulling through her peril with that mindset. During breakfast, Ma tells Jack they'll be baking a cake for his birthday. Jack gets all excited and exclaims in disbelief since he'd only ever seen it done on TV. After breakfast, Ma guides him in brushing his teeth. He watches TV, and Ma checks his new height, as naive as Jack is. He hopes to become a giant someday and shoot out to space through the skylight in room. He tells Ma that his long hair was like that of Samson's. Ma and Jack clear the rug and work out happily. Even in the teeny tiny room, Ma makes him do track, running from one side of the wall to the other. Jack assists Ma in the kitchen, a part of the room where they cook, to break eggs for the cake. Shortly after they were done, he closes his eyes, waiting to see his birthday cake. However, he's disappointed when he doesn't see any candles on it. He yells at his ma for not asking Old Nick to buy important things other than some dumb jeans. Old Nick usually gets them the stuff they need in room, but Jack believes everything was gotten from the TV by magic. Ma, however, pulls him close and calms him down. Later on, they bathe together, and Ma does the laundry afterward. She tells him a bedtime story while he suckles. Jack troubles Ma for another bite of his cake and another story, while making his bed in the wardrobe. However, she refuses to do his bid and sings him a lullaby instead. Not long after Jack goes to bed, we see a man open the door using a code, which only he knows. In comes Old Nick into the room with groceries and jeans for Jack. His noise wakes a sleepy Jack up, and he peeps through his wardrobe. Old Nick's surprised to see the half-eaten birthday cake and asks if it was Jack's birthday. Jack peeps as Old Nick takes off his trousers to join Ma in bed. Jack counts numbers to drown away the noise coming from Ma's bed. The scene cuts through to where Jack tells us that outside of room was the outer space, where all TV planets exist. He believes that everything else that didn't fit into room was not real. Only he and Ma were real, and he wondered if Old Nick was also real. He also hopes his dog Lucky, a drawing he made, will come to him someday by magic. He falls asleep, and Ma returns him to bed after Old Nick leaves. In the morning, Ma loses her bad tooth, and Jack is fascinated by it. While Ma takes a nap, Jack sees a mouse for the first time. He lures it in with more crumbs, but Ma flings a book at it and gets rid of it. Jack gets angry at his Ma for taking out his supposed new friend. He gets furious, but Ma tells him they couldn't afford to keep the mouse for health reasons. She tells him that the mouse was safe with his own Ma in the backyard. Jack wonders what the backyard was, but Ma doesn't explain to him either. Jack asks why Ma didn't tell Old Nick to get a gift for him on his birthday. Ma tells him that Old Nick wasn't their friend. He wasn't supposed to be listening to their conversation. He irritates her even more when he asks for a pet dog. Room didn't even have enough space for them, talk less of a loud animal. He tries convincing Ma that his dog, Lucky, wouldn't inconvenience them. However, Ma yells at him, telling him that Lucky doesn't even exist since he made it up in his head. Later on, they watch TV and make egg snakes with eggshells. The same drill goes on. He sleeps in the wardrobe, and when Old Nick leaves, Ma puts him back in bed. In the morning, Jack wakes up to see a birthday present Old Nick got him. He plays with the toy car in excitement, and now he probably believes Old Nick could bring everything he wanted through magic. Jack and Ma scream at the top of their lungs through the ventilator, hoping to be heard. However, no one ever screams back, and Jack asks why the aliens never scream back. He believes that aliens live outside room. They even scream much louder, but the result was no different. In comes Old Nick at his usual time. However, he doesn't get Jack's vitamins. When Ma asks about it, he explains how little she knows about the world and its current economy. He'd been laid off for 6 months and would be cutting down on some of their expenses. He speaks as though Joy had been locked away from the world of her own accord, expecting her to be grateful for everything. Ma asks if he'd been looking for jobs, and he gets irritated by her questions and freaks out. His noise frightens Jack, who's been peeping at them. Old Nick goes close to Jack's wardrobe and almost lures him out with candy. Ma, however, stops him, asking him to join her in bed. After Old Nick and Ma fall asleep, Jack sneaks out of his wardrobe to look for the candy. His curiosity sets in as he tiptoes to take a glance at Old Nick. Old Nick, however, senses him and opens his eyes. He tries to touch Jack, but Ma immediately wakes up and grabs him, stopping him from touching him. Old Nick immediately jumps on Ma and chokes her, and Jack screams in fear and returns to his wardrobe. Old Nick leaves after warning Ma not to pull such a stunt with him again, reminding her that she got Jack through him. Jack runs to his Ma and promises to never leave the wardrobe again. In the morning, Jack sees the scar Old Nick had made on Ma's neck. Upon seeing the hot breath from his mouth, he thinks that he's become a dragon. He wakes Ma up only to tell her he's a dragon. Old Nick had cut their power and it was snowing outside. Ma puts Jack in some warm clothes, and they have cereal for breakfast. Jack reads a book while Ma guides him through. In a way, Ma had provided almost everything for her son, except the truth about the world. However, Ma decides to tell him the truth about the world, and she starts by talking about the mouse she had eliminated. She tells Jack that she knew where it was. She tries to get through to Jack so she could explain how the world is. She even uses Old Nick as an example, but Jack believes Old Nick gets their food from TV. Jack, like any other person would, refuses to believe his Ma immediately, so he requests something else to eat. Not interested in Ma's new story, Ma gets the message, but she yanks him up to see a leaf on their skylight. Jack believes all leaves were green and thinks Ma was probably trying to trick him. She tells him that she'd made up a story about the world when he was much younger, but now that he's older she's decided to tell him the truth. Ma tells him that she lived with her parents in their house. Unfortunately, Old Nick stole her and kept her captive in his garden shade room for 7 years. Jack demands another story when he doesn't find Ma's new story comfortable, but that was the story he gets since it was the truth. Ma tells him how big the world is, and that room was just an insignificantly tiny part of it. Jack refuses to hear anything against room, leaving them both emotional. The next morning, Jack fixes himself up. He ponders over everything Ma said about the world while he plays. He even dumps his car gift in the trash. Later on, when Ma was all better, she does the dishes and sees Jack's toy car in the trash, wondering why he'd dumped it. Jack shows interest in Ma's story and asks if turtles were real. His Ma is pleased to explain everything to him. She even explains to him how the TV shows work. Jack now believes Ma's story. Maybe not completely, but he promises to deal with Old Nick. However, Ma had tried to deal with Old Nick once, but she failed. She'd smashed the toilet lid on him, but he hurt her wrist in the process. Jack suggests they put him to eternal rest in his sleep. However, that would be a disaster, because they'd be trapped in a tiny room with a stinking corpse, and they'd run out of foodstuff. Ma comes up with a plan to trick Old Nick by making Jack fake sickness so he could take him to the hospital. Jack's nervous and begs to help when he's much older. However, he had to do it. Ma uses a hot towel on him so he could have high body temperature, and she uses her vomit to rub on him so he smells sick. Ma gives him a note to give anyone he sees when Old Nick takes him to the hospital. They wait anxiously for Old Nick to arrive. However, when he arrives, he doesn't fall for it. Ma makes him see Jack's condition, begging him to take the boy to the hospital, and Jack is scared to death when Old Nick touches him. Old Nick, instead, leaves to get antibiotics for Jack. The next morning, Ma comes up with a more risky plan to make Jack play dead. She makes Jack rehearse an almost impossible drill. She rolls him up on a rug and makes him wiggle out repeatedly. Jack freaks out when he can't take it anymore. Ma calms him down and instructs him on what to do. She tells him to wiggle, jump out of the truck and run when Old Nick gets to a stop. He puts Ma's bad tooth in his mouth so he doesn't lose it, and Ma gives him a note to give to anyone he sees. Jack wonders what she meant by somebody, and Ma explains to him. Jack gets nervous since Ma was sending him to a place he'd never been before. Outside of room, in comes Old Nick with Jack's antibiotics. However, Jack would be, but didn't make it through the night, Ma explains. Fortunately, Old Nick falls for it, and Ma asks him to swear not to even look at Jack's face. He promises and takes Jack's supposed lifeless body to bury somewhere with trees, as Ma instructed. He gives a reaction we could call pity for Ma as he heads towards his truck with Jack. Old Nick drives with Jack's body in his truck, but Jack is unable to wiggle out after the first stop. After a few tries, he's able to wiggle out, and he lays flat on the truck facing the vast sky above him. His heart pounds in anxiety as he sees the world for the first time. When Old Nick gets to the third stop, he tries to jump out, but he immediately drives the car, making Jack back to the truck. Upon hearing the noise, Old Nick halts to grab him, but Jack jumps to the ground before he could reach him. Jack wobbles multiple times since everything seems unfamiliar. However, he manages to bump into someone. Jack shouts for help when Old Nick forcefully takes him away. The man senses Jack was in trouble, so he calls the cops. Old Nick drops Jack and flees the scene immediately. Jack refuses to talk to anyone or leave the field he was lying on until the police arrive. He whispers his name to the female cop who picked him up. The flashing lights from cars struck too bright for Jack as the cops drove. He shows the cop his Ma's tooth, but he forgot Ma's name. He manages to describe to the female cop about room and the routes Old Nick took. With that, the cops get a rough description of Ma's location, and they leave to rescue her. The scene cuts to an emotional moment where Ma reunites with her son after putting him up to such a risky plan. On their way to the hospital, Jack asks Ma if they could go to bed in room, and Ma worries about him. Joy's mom arrives at the hospital, overwhelmed with the news, to see her long-lost daughter. In the morning, Jack wakes up in a hospital room with Ma, and the daylight strikes as too bright for his eyes. He tiptoes to the room's skyscraper window and looks down. He runs back to the bed and wakes Ma upon seeing how far the building went to the ground. He asks Ma if they were on another planet, and she explains that they were in a hospital room. Ma tells him that Grandma had come to see them when he was fast asleep. He apologizes to Ma for wetting the bed, and immediately a call comes in, informing Ma that their breakfast was ready. She takes him to the bathroom to wash up, and she dumps his soiled panty in the trash. However, Jack sees it as a waste, but Ma tells him he'll have lots of treats. Ma makes him see his face in the mirror for the first time, and he asks her if Old Nick would ever find them again. Ma assures him that they were safe and takes him to have a bath. In comes Dr. Middle to their room with breakfast, and Jack wraps around his Ma afraid. He says hello to Jack, but he glues to Ma's body, refusing to say a word. He gives them sunglasses so they can adjust to the daylight and sunscreen for Jack. He gives some medicine for Ma's sore wrist and nose masks. Dr. Middle asks her to reconsider what they'd discussed earlier and about accessing Jack. Jack needed to go through therapy to free him from his misconception about the world, so he could have a normal childhood. However, Ma just needed to return home, but she was worried about Jack as well. Not quite long, Joy's parents rush into the room to see their daughter since they couldn't wait much longer. Grandma thanks Jack for his bravery in saving their daughter, but Grandpa doesn't say a word to him. Joy's parents do not live together anymore, but Grandma stays with Leo, her friend. Jack and his Ma go through a series of tests, and also catch the news of Old Nick's arrest on TV. On their way home, Jack explains that the world keeps changing its brightness and hotness, day and night. As they arrive, they see a crowd of reporters and paparazzi, each wanting to get a picture or an interview with Joy. Their noise affects Jack. However, Ma manages to pull through the crowd with him. Grandma is instructed to keep the drapes down to prevent too much light into the house. Ma helps Jack through the stairs, and he meets Leo, Grandma's friend. Jack settles in the living room with Ma, and Grandma asks if she could offer him something. He, however, whispers everything to Ma and that he wanted juice. After Grandma leaves to get the juice, Ma tells him that he doesn't have to whisper everything to her. He sees the tons of toys people had gifted him, and he asks Ma about them. Grandma tells him that Leo has a pet dog, Seamus, but he was staying away until their immunity comes back up. In comes Grandpa to talk about the lawyer on Joy's case. He tells them that he's refused to allow any further interviews or statements to keep their family's respect until Joy was fine. Grandma joins Jack and Ma to see her room. Grandma suggests Jack to cut his hair, but he whispers to Ma that his hair was his strength, like that of Samson. The scene cuts to where they all have dinner, and Jack has ice cream for the first time. Joy's dad gets uncomfortable with Jack sitting beside him, and Joy notices. Joy's dad couldn't stomach having to see the son of the monster who destroyed his daughter's life. Joy's dad suddenly gives an excuse to leave dinner, but Joy confronts her dad for not saying a word to Jack since she'd been found. She gets pissed and stumps off with Jack when Grandpa refuses to look at Jack. In her room, Ma shows Jack a few pictures of herself, after which she gets emotional over how her promising life got crushed by a single act of kindness. The next day, in comes their lawyer to talk about Joy giving an interview with Primetime since a single interview could cover their expenses. Joy falls into depression and is unhappy even after she's returned home. Jack, on the other hand, wants to know how long they'll be staying, so he could return to room. In the morning, Jack wakes up at the usual time he does back in room, but Ma was still asleep. He stealthily watches Leo see someone off. Upon seeing him, Leo pretends to look for someone to play with him. He lures Jack to the kitchen for breakfast. Jack asks Leo about his dog Seamus. When Leo tells him about Seamus, Jack opens up to him about his dog in room, Lucky. However, it wasn't real. Later on, Dr. Middle has a session with Jack, drawing. Just then, Grandma walks in to tell Dr. Middle that Joy didn't want to talk. The doctor tells Grandma to allow her to rest since he was almost done with Jack's session. Jack gets on Ma's nerves when he disturbs her sleep as he watches a cartoon on Grandma's phone. When he refuses to leave the room, Ma drags him downstairs to his piles of toys. She pours the Lego for him to play with, but he doesn't even say a word or play with it, and it infuriates her. Grandma confronts Joy for being hard on Jack, and they get into an argument when Joy asks Grandma not to give Jack her phone to play with. She breaks into tears, confused about how to help Jack connect with real things. Grandma tries to comfort her. However, another argument ensues when Joy accuses Grandma of not caring about her. The Primetime arrive with their crew to interview Joy, and Grandma asks Jack to remain downstairs as his Ma had instructed. Ma's lawyer asks her to only answer questions she feels comfortable with as she gets ready to be interviewed. While she gives her interview, Jack sneaks in to listen in on them. He's pleased when he hears Ma say she had to protect him from Old Nick. When she's asked what to tell Jack about his father, Joy insists Jack was hers alone. The host asks why Joy didn't give Jack to her captor so he could be found and be free to have a normal childhood. Joy is taken aback by the question, realizing that she alone wasn't enough for Jack to have a normal childhood. Jack wakes up and doesn't find Ma in the room. He pushes the bathroom door open only to find her in a bad state. Jack panics as she's taken away in an ambulance. After some time, a call comes in for Jack. Leo guides him on how to use the phone, and he demands that Ma returns home immediately. When she tells him she couldn't, Jack freaks out and runs back upstairs. Jack starts getting along with everyone around the house. He plays with his toys and joins Grandma and Leo in watching TV. In Jack's mind, he thinks Ma had wanted to go to heaven, leaving him behind, but the aliens threw her back. He joins Grandma in grocery shopping and even talks to a neighbor. He helps Grandma in the kitchen and she praises his commendable skill in breaking eggs. Jack tells Grandma he'd been helping his Ma with it back in room. He talks about the wardrobe, where he normally slept when Old Nick came. Hearing that broke Grandma's heart. Jack tells Grandma he misses some of the things he did in room since Ma was always there with him. Grandma tells him that Ma just needed some time alone and that she will be fine soon. In comes Leo with Seamus, and Grandma takes Jack to see the dog. Jack falls in love with Seamus immediately. Leo takes Jack on a walk with it and he has some fun. Jack goes through Ma's picture album, and he goes to Grandma, asking for scissors to cut his hair. He tells Grandma he wishes to cut his hair, and send it to Ma so she could get better. Grandma gets emotional at the little boy's gesture, and she gives him an amazing salon home service. Grandma's overwhelmed when Jack says that he loves her. Jack's new friend arrives to play football with him. Jack wobbles and falls to the ground while they play, since he'd never played before. Ma watches in awe as he gets along so well. Jack jumps up for a hug in excitement when Ma calls out to him. The scene cuts through to where Ma apologizes to Jack for leaving him and being hard on him. He accepts her apology, asking her not to do it again. Ma tells him that when she saw his hair and his strength, she knew she needed to get better. Jack asks if he could suckle, but Ma tells him there was none left. Ma breaks into tears, telling him she was not good enough Ma. However, to Jack, she was his Ma, and upon hearing him, Ma knew she needed to be better. He pretends to leave Ma to join his friend but jumps on her, and she cuddles him happily. Jack tells us that when he was little, he knew little things and now he knows big things. He wonders why people don't fall off the earth even when it's always spinning. When he's much older, he'll know why. Jack begins to fit in, as he has fun and even entertains everyone at home. Jack explores the world with his Ma, trying out every fun thing. One day, while Jack and Ma rest on the hammock, he asks Ma to take him to room for a visit. Ma and Jack alongside the cops arrive at Old Nick's house. They arrive at the garden shed only to see that it had been crashed open, and some of the items in the room had been taken for evidence. Jack's surprised at how tiny the room looked, and he asks Ma if it had been shrunk. Ma explains to him that it had always been small. However, Jack tells her that it could only be room if it was locked from the outside. Ma is taken aback upon hearing him. She gets uncomfortable and asks to leave. The movie ends as Jack walks down a memory lane as he carefully bids everything goodbye in room, after which he and Ma walk away to total freedom.